So I am talking to Jack Norris, who is a registered dietitian. He's the co-author of Vegan for Life. He is the co-founder of Vegan Outreach, and he is also the brains behind veganhealth.org, which is an amazing site that brings together scientific research showing people how to be healthy on a plant-based diet. It's a site that I love and go to all the time, so I'm really excited to talk to you today,
Yeah,
Jack.
thank you. Thanks a lot.
Now, you are an animal rights activist, and you're also a registered dietitian. Do you ever find those two roles clash, or do you see a vegan diet as the best choice for both health and compassion?
Well, since I don't work with patients that are not vegan very often, I don't have the usual problems that a normal dietitian might in terms of working with a lot of people who eat meat and dairy. Um, and I would say nutrition science at this point has not gotten to where they know what the best diet is. And I don't think that there ever really will be a time where you can just pinpoint and say this one diet is the best diet. But we do know that a vegan diet is a very healthy choice, and that vegans have significantly lower rates of diabetes, hypertension. On average, we have much lower cholesterol and triglyceride levels, and we have lower body weights. So there are definitely advantages to be had for people being vegan.
Mm-hmm. Definitely with a lot of the problems that we're seeing nowadays, those things that you mentioned are some of the biggest problems that people have.
And I think one of the most exciting things was just a few months ago, a study came out that actually followed vegans and measured of the rates of getting diabetes over time. And the vegans had about a 33% risk of diabetes compared to the meat eaters. So it was a whole lot of difference. It wasn't just a small amount.
Yeah, that's huge. Now, the most common question I get is, can you get balanced nutrition on a plant-based diet? So how do you respond to that question?
Well, of course, the answer is yes, you can. And the main thing is to make sure you're getting a reliable source of vitamin B12, calcium, and iodine. Those are the three things that I think all vegans really need to think about. Then there's a few other nutrients that some vegans may find themselves short on, such as vitamin D can be an issue for people who don't get much sun or whose skin is not effective at converting sunshine to vitamin D. For people who don't know, most people get most of their vitamin D from sunshine, but you have to actually be exposed to it regularly. Iron can be a problem for some women. Studies seem to indicate that vegan men have no problems with iron, but plant iron can be hard to absorb. And iron is, a problem for women across the board, no matter what their diet is. For some women, I mean, but vegetarians can have a harder time absorbing iron. So the best way to get around that is to try to eat vitamin C with your meals. Vitamin C really increases plant iron absorption significantly. And protein is only going to be an issue if you're someone who avoids legumes and quinoa. If you eat legumes and quinoa on a daily basis, like 2 to 3 servings a day, which most vegans normally do because so many foods that we eat have those foods are made from legumes, which includes peanuts, beans, any soy foods. Um, if you eat those foods, then protein shouldn't be an issue at all. Some vegans might benefit from a zinc supplement because vegans just barely reach the RDA for zinc. And zinc is a little harder to absorb from plant foods, so that might be the case. If someone finds themselves maybe feeling like they're getting sick or their wounds are not healing, there might be a zinc issue. Now that's not very common, but it's something to just be aware of. And then the final thing is a DHA, omega-3 fatty acid. DHA is found only in fish. Now our bodies can convert other omega-3s into DHA, but some people, especially as they age, they don't do it efficiently. So I actually recommend that vegans, if it's convenient for them, that they get a DHA supplement and take it once every 2 or 3 days. But if you're over 60, then I recommend taking it every day or every other day at least. And that about covers it.
Okay, and have you seen any comparison on the fish oil-based DHAs versus algae-based DHAs?
It shouldn't make any difference. I have seen one study that showed that the algae-based DHA was just fine in raising DHA levels. They're the same molecule, so it really shouldn't make any difference at all. Most studies are done on the fish oil just because it's so much more common.
Yeah.
And a good thing is also that with the algae-based DHA, you can be assured that there won't be any mercury in it, whereas you are not necessarily assured of that with fish oil supplements.
Good point. And in terms of supplements, you also mentioned vitamin D, and there's a lot of talk of vitamin D3 versus vitamin D2. What are your thoughts on that?
Vitamin D3 is the non-vegan version, which comes, for the most part, which comes from lanolin, which is from sheep's wool, and fish oil. There is now a vitamin D3, vegan vitamin D3 on the market. So if people are more interested in D3, they can find it. It's easy to find online, especially at my blog has a discussion about that. So vitamin D2 and vitamin D3 are not exactly the same, but they both have vitamin D activity in the body. In very large doses, vitamin D3 is more effective. It stays in the system longer than does vitamin D2. But these are doses for treating vitamin D deficiency. But at the lower doses that people are going to be taking from supplements and fortified foods, vitamin D2 seems to be just as effective. People can raise their levels even with severe vitamin D deficiency. They can still raise their levels with vitamin D2, but people more consistently are able to do it with vitamin D3. And the main thing is to take the vitamin D2 more often if you're using vitamin D2.
Now, you've mentioned a few supplements. What are your ideas on taking supplements? People sometimes think of them as unnatural and that they make a vegan diet not as good as other diets. What do you think about that?
That's a good question because I think it's in a lot of people's minds. Well, you don't actually, so vitamin B12 is the one nutrient that vegans really don't get from their foods at all, or sunshine. They don't get it in any natural ways. But you actually could, because vitamin B12 is very prevalent in feces. And so a lot of primates actually eat feces. Now, of course, we do not want to do that. That wouldn't be healthy in itself to do, in addition to being not appetizing. But it is a way that vegans could naturally get it. I mean, this is kind of bizarre, but I'm just saying you can get B12 through natural methods if possible. Now, I don't consider a natural diet to be the equivalent of a healthy diet. I don't even think it would be easy to know what a natural diet is at this time. Almost all the food we eat, except seafood and hunted animals, are unnatural. I mean, we've bred animals to be a lot different than they were at one time. They eat, animals on factory farms eat things they would not eat in the wild for the most part. And then the foods that we eat, the plant foods we eat, are not the same as what we would have eaten before agriculture happened. So we wouldn't even really know what it is. You'd have to ask an expert to know what humans actually even ate. But we do know that humans ate a lot of insects, and a lot of the Paleolithic dieters who are striving to eat a natural diet, I rarely come across one that actually eats insects. So I'm not sure that, I don't know that anyone's really striving to eat as natural as possible. And I don't try to strive to be like my prehistoric ancestors in any way at all, including my diet. So I understand why people think about this and why it's a concern, but no one's really eating naturally. And what's important is what is healthy now, not what was healthy eons ago. And nutrition science can tell us to a large extent what is healthy now, and a vegan diet can be a healthy choice.
Right. I've also seen some things talking about supplements actually being a better source for certain nutrients, like in the case of B12, it comes from bacteria and we don't necessarily absorb it very well from food.
As people age, they lose the ability to separate the vitamin B12 from the proteins that it comes attached to in animal foods. And so for this reason, the Institute of Medicine that sets the RDAs recommends that anyone over 50 get at least half of the RDA of vitamin B12 from fortified foods or supplements. So even for meat eaters, that's the recommendation for older people.
I've heard a lot of people who want to avoid supplementation, looking at algae, looking at fermented foods like tempeh. What are your thoughts on those?
So I understand that desire. Unfortunately, it just hasn't turned out very well. Vitamin B12 is one of a number of groups of molecules that are all very similar. They're called corinoids. And many of the ways to measure vitamin B12 just measures corinoids and doesn't actually measure what's true B12 and what isn't. So things like algae especially have a lot of corinoids. And no algae has actually been shown to improve vitamin B12 status in humans. So coronoids can interfere with each other. So if you have too much inactive, if you have too much non-B12 coronoids, it's going to stop the B12 from being used. So you have to get, it's not just a matter of having B12 in a food, it's having a good ratio of active B12 to non-active coronoids. And so because of that, algae is a problem. Now, tempeh, as I mentioned earlier, you can get B12 from feces and from anything that the bacteria that produce B12 contaminate can end up with B12 in it. And some tempeh starters have been apparently contaminated and in Asia with bacteria that at least produce coronoids. It's not clear if they produce active B12 or not. But in the U.S., they have not found any coronoids in tempeh. So in the U.S., you can't rely on tempeh. I mean, I wouldn't rely on it anywhere, but for sure in the U.S. or in the Western world, you can't rely on tempeh for B12. Were there any others? I mean, there's always rumors going around of different algae being a B12, but so far none have been shown to actually improve B12 status.
Now we've talked about nutrients that vegans need to be careful to get. What are some nutrients that people might be scared that they're not getting enough of but have no trouble getting on a plant-based diet?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Protein is
Okay.
is the biggest one. And like I hinted at before, it is possible not to get enough protein, but it's very unlikely. I mean, you kind of have to go out of your way to do it. So just make sure you're eating legumes on a regular basis. A lot of men I hear worrying about iron, and the research shows that vegan men really don't need to worry about iron. Iron is very prevalent in plant foods. It's just a matter of whether it's absorbed well. And because men don't lose iron every month, we don't seem to have an issue with plant iron. Now, some vegan women will who don't absorb it as well might. Another thing you can do is not drink green or black tea or coffee with meals. That will also, because those foods decrease iron absorption. Okay. So if you avoid them, you'll increase your iron absorption.
What about people who eat meat, dairy, and eggs? Are there any nutrients that they have a possibility of being deficient in and they should supplement as well?
Well, there was a time when when your average meat eater was not getting enough folate or folic acid. It was actually kind of inadvertent. The main reason that the government started requiring that processed grains be fortified with folate is because women were having too many neural tube defects, and that is because of being deficient in folate. What happened was that it raised everyone's folate levels, and it started reducing the risk for stroke. So folate is in a lot of plant foods, and so you can be a meat eater and get plenty of folate if you choose the right plant foods along with the rest of your foods, but people weren't getting enough. So people have meat eaters have benefited from that supplementation. And then there's vitamin D in milk. Milk doesn't naturally have vitamin D, it's fortified with it. And most meat eaters get a lot of their iodine from milk as well, and iodine isn't naturally in milk either. It ends up in milk because it's used as a disinfectant in dairy. So these are kind of inadvertent supplementation. Then of course there's any processed grains are fortified with iron, B1, B2, and B3. And before that was happening, people were getting diseases. Now you could have eaten whole grains to avoid that. But there are, no one should really think that, unless you're a very rare exception, that you're getting along on a natural diet without fortification. I mean, when you were a baby, most likely you were given fortified foods and supplements and things like that. Before we started doing that, people had all kinds of nutritional diseases, and it wasn't until we learned how to avoid them that people started to be able to.
All right, so we've gone over a lot of info, and you have a ton of information on your site that I would love to ask you more about, but what are maybe the main points that you would want to leave people with?
Well, like I mentioned, if you're going to be vegan, then be aware of vitamin B12, calcium, and iodine. Those are the three main things that you should be aware of. And then these other ones you should read up on as you get time. I mean, if you just read any article on my site that summarizes it, on veganhealth.org, I have a link to recommendations in the upper left, and you can click on that, and it gives a real quick summary of each nutrient and how to deal with it. For the most part, being vegan should help improve your health. if you, do it relatively right, where you eat some fruits and vegetables, some raw, some cooked, and a wide variety of plant foods. And I don't think it's important to eat only whole foods, but to eat a decent amount. And you should find yourself having, at least if you go to the doctor and have your cholesterol measured, it will likely be lower. Triglycerides should be better. Blood sugar control should be better, that sort of thing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jack, for taking the time to chat today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.